streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. The meeting's being held using remote technology, and should be any committee members experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately ring the support telephone number they've been given. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak, and please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak. Do not use it for anything else. As chair, I will interpret the council's...
Tim, we're not hearing you. Sorry, it's really broken.
As I was just saying, as chair, I'll interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. I will ask everyone invited to speak during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time before they speak. I will now ask Phil, the partnership manager, to read out a list of those members attending. Phil? Yeah,
I will work down the participants list in the order they come in. So there's a mix of partnership members and team members here. So myself, Alison Kay, Alison Jones, Carol Griffiths, Kath Landals, Cecilia Motley, David Mills, David Turner, Hilary Clayton-Smith, James Williamson, Joy Howells, Mike Kelly, Nigel MacDonald, Robert Tyndall, Tim Ward, Robert Harris, Adrian, Neil. We don't have all full names because of the way people have signed in, I'm afraid. Andrew, Wayne Barnes, Charles Edwards, Chris Naylor, Ian Dormer, Janet Cobb, Mark Hughes, Nick Reed, Sarah Berry, and Chris Turner.
Phil, Neil is actually Veronica Cossins.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm using his computer.
And Adrian is Adrian Collins.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm here, Robert Tyndall.
I have the apologies from Tim, which I can
please
read.
do.
Jill Binks, Sonia Belshire, Emma Johnson, John Pritchard, Leo Smith and Claire Featherstone.
Okay, thank you. The minutes of, turning to item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of November. Has anyone got any items of or errors or omissions that we need to be aware of? No, I can't see anyone saying anything. So can I have a second?
James, so a couple of things I wanted to just highlight. It referred to the further response on the local plan, the Reg 19 consultation response, which was made on the 25th of February. And we did make some points about renewables, which we might come back to in some of the other agenda items. And also to flag, it's in the papers elsewhere, but just we discussed the Glover review and the government, the fact that the government's response is still awaited, and that is still the case. It is a source of, I think, some disappointment and frustration that the government still hasn't made a full response to the Glover review. But that's the situation at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a seconder for the minutes? Someone put their hands up that I can see. Or right, thank you, Charles. We'll accept these minutes as true record unless anyone else indicates differently, and I will sign them at some stage. Item number 3, Nature Recovery Plan. Phil, are you going to talk to this?
I am, and in this slightly stilted format of an online meeting, I'd like first to do a short experiment, and please bear with me for a minute and a half. And all I'm going to do is to ask you to think for a moment. I'd like to ask you to think of your early memories of nature in your life, a particular place you remember when you were young. What the sights and smells and sounds might have been, perhaps any memories you have of encounters with wildlife, things that you saw that were exciting, memorable, maybe unexpected, and try to remember what that felt like. And then think about how those early experiences of nature might have shaped you and influenced your thoughts and decisions as an adult. And I'd like then to ask you to think about your experiences of nature that are recent or current, a place perhaps where you go, or particular things you've seen or heard, and think about the importance or significance of those times and experiences to you. And then finally, to think about how your experience of nature has changed over your life and what you remember differently from the past to now, things perhaps you saw regularly but you don't see as often or perhaps at all now. So it would be really nice to share everyone's thoughts on this, but obviously we don't have time, and that's not the purpose of what I was trying to do here. I am, however, going to guess that it's likely that thinking about your experiences of nature made you feel a bit more calm and at ease. I hope so. The research suggests that that sort of effect is more or less universal among humans, and that probably those experiences, past and present, have some importance to you, and that probably also over your life you've noticed some changes in nature. Some of my own early memories are about the stream where I used to play as a small child, birds on the Norfolk Broads, great crested grebes, coots, the hedgehog snuffling around when I was camping in the garden. And my interest in nature took me as a young adult to the rainforests of South America and mountains and islands of Scotland, and places that really inspired me. But in my lifetime, half of our species in the UK have declined. 40 million birds are reckoned to have disappeared, and a quarter of our mammals are now threatened with extinction. Worldwide, our demands on nature are reaching critical levels and endanger future generations. We're talking about pollinators, future genetic resources, keystone species that bind our ecosystems together. I know I'm lucky enough to have a wood around the corner from where I live, where I'm watching as the bluebells grow towards that lovely peak in May, and I've heard curlews calling over our hills 4 times in the last week. But I can't remember when I last saw a song thrush or a tree sparrow, and it's been quite a few years since I saw a hedgehog in the garden. So I think this exercise reminds us that nature matters to us, that we need nature and that it needs us. And there is a science and data side to this, but there's also the part about emotional connection, and that might actually be more significant to our motivation and our actions, and that's accessible to everyone, however much they know. Nature's the bit that's sometimes missing when people talk about fixing climate change to save the world. So we haven't got all the answers in this draft plan, but we really have to focus on this. We have to do more. And like the management plan, this is a plan for the area, not just for what our team can do. I'd like to thank those who've commented already. I've had some emails back, which is great. We're going to be taking comments on the plan till the end of June, and very happy to speak to groups about it during that time. So as we throw this open for discussion now, obviously welcome any comments you want to make on it. Would particularly welcome your thoughts on delivery, because I think that's the part of the plan that needs working up more. Thoughts about what you may be able to do or what we could do collectively in partnership. Or you may choose just to share your early memories of nature and what you've seen changing and send in your comments on the plan later. I don't mind, but I will hand over for discussion at that point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Phil. I'm just wondering, how do people indicate they want to speak? I can't see a hands up on this version of Teams.
There isn't share on the live version. We generally ask them to indicate in the chat.
Okay. So if anyone does want to speak, can you please put it in the chat?
Where's the speakerphone?
Can everyone see the chat? I'm struggling to see it, I must admit. I've
got
Tim.
it. It's under the little bubble. It's conversation, it says. I think that's where it is. Have you got it, Phil?
I haven't, but I don't necessarily need to, as long as you can see it and people are saying.
Could someone send me a message just to see if it is working?
Shall I go back onto Teams and another? Oh, we're on Teams here, aren't we? Yeah. Oh, what's that? This is where I began to hear what other people were doing.
Right, the chat is working. We can
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
Would anybody like to indicate in the chat that they'd like to speak on this item?
Okay, would you just like to say a little bit, Phil, about the sort of next stages? I mean, what you're planning to do?
Thanks, Chris.
Well, we do have quite a lot of
Aye.
conversations ongoing with various people and partners. I mean, we're kind of taking every opportunity that arises to discuss this with different groups. We had a Clun catchment partnership last week. I've done a couple of talks to parish councils, or one with another one coming up, and other local groups in which we'll talk about this. I should say a bit. I mean, I'm keen not to talk too much myself. It would be nice to. I see Alison's asking a question. I'll just say something quickly about the mapping. There is mapping work going on with a range of organisations. The National Trust are doing some in the Stepping Stones Area Shropshire Wildlife Trust, and it will go sort of to a really detailed level about looking at the habitat networks and how they can be enhanced. In the plan, we've used the nationally available on the Magic website, Natural England habitat network layout with these sort of network enhancement zones and so on, because it's something that's public accessible. Anybody can look at it and use it. There is I think a recognised need for slightly more advanced kind of mapping at a local area. Most of the mapping that's been done is sort of desk exercise, and there will be some maps sort of incorporating local knowledge, but hopefully what's there indicates the broad kind of scope of things. So
Okay, Alison, Catherine's raised the question. I don't know whether everyone can see it, but hi, I wanted to ask whether there are concerns about air quality across the area and how it is or isn't affecting biodiversity. I don't see much about it in the plan. So, Phil, you going to answer that?
yes, that's a good point. I mean, we know that. I mean, the critical thing for air quality in relation to this is probably ammonia, and we know that the sort of aerial nitrogen deposition onto wildlife sites is sort of exceeding critical loads. So some of sort of the woodland wildlife sites with kind of mosses and bryophytes on the trees and things that are very sensitive to nutrient loading are exceeded. Also heather moorland and things can be sort of impacted by aerial nitrogen deposition. So yes, that is a factor, and one that we should add in. Yes, thanks, Alison, for that point.
Nothing else? Okay. Well, I think I'd like to thank you, Phil, very much for getting this draft as far as forward as it is. I think it's really good. And I mean, you were saying to me last night that it is one of the first draft plans in the AONB group, 34 AONBs in the country. So that's really excellent. You've given a 3-month consultation period, I think, to the end of June. So if anyone has got, I've just seen a note here. So if anyone has got any comments, please make sure you feed it through to Phil before the end of June. Janet Cobb wants to say, is there an opportunity to talk to Shropshire's Highways to restore all of Shropshire's verges within the Kier contract?
Yeah, as some of us know, Janet's further ahead than most of us on this in terms of the management of road verges, and welcome, Janet, to the partnership. It's we should have said at the beginning, you've replaced Lizzie as the rep for Middlemarch's Community Land Trust, which is great. Yes, I mean there is more gradually going on with road verges and the Restoring Shropshire's Verges project led by Caring for God's Acre, with lots of other partners involved. I think have established some good contact with highways and are making some progress. And you're absolutely right. I mean, part of verges is sort of identifying the small kind of good bits that are left, but actually we could improve the cutting regime on a lot of the verges, and they are a really significant kind of area of relatively unimproved grassland in the AONB and indeed the county that are, you know, is increasingly rare. So that's an important point. Can I answer the other questions that I can see, James?
Yes, please do, Phil.
And I mean, by all means, people can unmute and think and say these questions. But Adrian, there's no formal kind of process. Send in emails, or you know, if people want to have a chat about these things, it's fine. We've adopted sort of a 3-month. This is the kind of council standard procedure for consulting on public documents. This isn't as formal a process as the AONB management plan. We will try and publicise it. At the moment, the emphasis has been on just getting the draft plan out. So in whatever form kind of suits you is the answer.
Okay. Janet raised another question. What's the cause of the ammonia? Well,
the main cause is felt to be intensive poultry units. That's the main cause of ammonia as we understand it.
Okay. Chris Naylor's point about trees, native trees.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely sort of planting natives as a focus. I think there is more acceptance now with the climate changing that there should be a slightly broader variety of species planted for resilience. We have a fairly small number of native species in Britain, and they are, you know, quite a few of them are subject to various diseases. Obviously, we are sort of pushing a naturalistic style of planting, and that would, some organisations are saying native species only. Obviously, in kind of more commercial plantation, the variety is broader. So I think there is a mix. I think in conservation planting, we'd certainly look to all or predominantly native species, but that debate certainly about resilience for other species is important.
James, can you hear me? I've been trying to send a message, but it doesn't seem to be going through.
Sorry, it is through, Veronica. We're just going through them
Right,
roughly
so
in order, but go ahead.
well, I don't want to, go out of my turn, but I wanted to say there's been quite a history of working towards a wildlife rich network in Shropshire. People have got lots and lots of ideas. They know what they want to achieve. And surely we can see this as a huge opportunity to push it forwards now and really make something of it and achieve something. Because I think we do know what we're asking. Could you hear any of that?
Yeah, I can hear it, Veronica.
So I think we should seize it as an opportunity to really get on and push towards what we've always known we needed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. You know that this plan is trying to take the activity that's going, but saying, you know, it's not enough, and we need to do more. We need to scale things up.
I mean, you need to be able to look at a landscape and see that it's connected, know that it's connected, and also know that it's trapping lots of carbon. I mean, we know how to do it. It's getting it done, is what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Veronica.
Neil, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
So Neil is Veronica.
Oh, sorry. That, yeah. Alison, do you want to come back? Unmute.
Hi. Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking whether there should be a little bit more about what the continuing threats are to the biodiversity, and I just thought, well, that would help link to, well, what are the actions? A little bit, not in every case, obviously. Something about more connectivity and so on is clear enough, but that if there are continuing threats to certain types of biodiversity, should they be brought out a little bit more in the plan? I don't know, maybe is there a set format that you have to follow for the plan, or is it something that could go in?
We've been given guidance. A small group of lead officers nationally from AONB teams have developed a guidance document which provides the basic structure, but it's a new thing and it's not absolutely fixed in stone. I think, well, and certainly, I mean, as James said, we are among the first, possibly the first, to have got a draft plan out. It could easily be double the length, but I think we don't want it to be too long. I think at sort of 35 pages, that's an advantage in terms of getting it read and getting it communicated. So I think there's a balance as we go forward in terms of how much detail we put in. I think, I mean, some of the early comments have been, there's quite a bit already about kind of the state of nature and so on, and how it is, and we need to do a bit more on the delivery, which I absolutely agree with, and that's been the hard bit. I suppose a bit like the management plan, this isn't a plan that sort of controls one particular funding stream or delivery source or organisation. It's a variety of ones to kind of marshal together.
I suppose, sorry, excuse me. I suppose I was just thinking, if there are particular threats, it could just be flagged up quite quickly, whether it's tourism or the development, housing, if it's particular forms of recreation, particular forms of land management or something. It's maybe just, it wasn't coming through to me very clearly what we felt were the sort of current burning issues in that sense.
Mm.
Okay.
Can I make a comment about, I don't know, we're at risk of turning into a sort of webinar format where questions are asked on the chat and I'm the only one talking, and it's great, Alison and Veronica, you've spoken. It's quite difficult to read the questions. My understanding of what we were trying to do was that the chat is used for, can I ask a question? And then we actually get people to ask them.
I think that's a good idea.
And that would actually make for a more conversational style. I'm certainly finding it quite difficult to concentrate on talking to someone while reading all the other questions that are coming in. And it's not meant to be all me talking.
Okay. Alison, are you happy now with before we move on to somebody else? I'm assuming so. And Andrew, can you unmute and ask your question?
I can, yes, apparently. Good morning, everyone. So my question was about connectivity and the fact that good quality habitat is great, but it doesn't serve a lot of purpose if it's in tiny, isolated patches. So connectivity allows wildlife to move around. It ensures genetic diversity. Connectivity in an area like ours is hugely dependent on strips, whether that's verges or hedgerows, and therefore management of those strips is absolutely critical to this. Management is out of our hands for the most part. So I phrased my point as what chance of reducing the cutting regime, but what I mean is what purchase are we going to have on those land managers who do bad things to verges and hedgerows?
One thing I'd like to say, Andrew, is if you look at what's coming out of the sort of Elms project, hedgerows are going to be quite a major feature, I think, and there's going to be quite a lot of emphasis on improving hedgerows, which will certainly help the connectivity. I don't know what you got any further comment, Phil, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interaction with farming and land management is absolutely the key of this sort of plan, as it says in it. It's a thread right through. It's a really important part of the debate. This is a farmed landscape. Even our best, many of our best sort of wildlife sites, the triple SIs, the Stiper Stones Nature Reserve, the Longmynd, and so on, are grazed. It's that interaction that's so important. It's a sensitive conversation. Some of the stuff you read about wildlife decline says intensification of agriculture and land use is a massive factor. Probably that's true. It's not a comfortable conversation. It's not a comfortable thing to have to say, and it can put people on a back foot and defensive. So we need to have that conversation, in a sensitive way and in a constructive and forward-looking way. And I suppose that's partly why we haven't kind of flagged up those things as threats. There are other factors, of course there are, and when you look at individual species, yes, recreational influence, dogs off leads and ground nesting birds and predation and things. Predation is something that most prey species have evolved with over millennia, and healthy populations of most things can survive predation. So it's often a factor when populations are reduced to critically low levels by other factors, and habitat change is usually reckoned to be key to that. So I think overall that discussion about land management is key, and there are certain powers. There's regulations, there's water regulations, there's hedgerow regulations, which are reckoned to by many to not be very strong. but there are many things that farmers and land managers do that aren't under control, and you know, that's the freedom of the country that we live in. So there is a need for kind of just discussion and influence about some of those practices, but we're not looking at a scenario of kind of control. It has to be by discussion and consensus, a lot of it, over and above the minimum legal standards.
Phil, can I come in? Carol Griffiths, county chairman of the NFU, and when it comes to hedge trimming, there are so many different views on this. My husband and I run a very low intensive farm. He's not a huge fan of hedge trimming. Our hedges are huge. Birds fly out of them in vast quantities. But our neighbours complain to the council because they are not tidy, and we are paid a grant to keep our hedges in order. And why don't we? So I think you do have to understand that farmers are sometimes badgered from both sides of any argument, and I do think it's very difficult for us to come to a place where everything is micromanaged, and I do think also that the early site we've had of elms for consultation shows that the options for hedges are actually going to be, I think, extremely good. I think even with verges, I've had someone saying our verges are bare, and our verges are not bare. What they are is one thing has gone back down into the ground and we're waiting for the next thing to pop up. But we look at it every day, so we do see what's around. And I think I think elms has a lot of options for farmers, many of which will be extremely good for them to see.
Yeah. Thanks, Carol. No, that's really good to hear about your hedges. And I mean, I think the thrust of public funding would be, and more into the future, that support where there's grants for managing hedges, that they're managing for their environmental and wildlife value, and not really just for tidiness. I think tidiness can be, as people say, a sort of enemy for wildlife, and I think there's a cultural thing in sort of hedges and roads, as there is in gardens, and there's a shift in that towards wildlife gardening and so on, that does have to accept a less tidy approach is better for nature in many cases.
Well, I think it's people who don't necessarily haven't always lived in the countryside who find it quite difficult. We sort of feel you can take the man out of Surbiton, but you can't take Surbiton out of the man. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. David, I'm intrigued by the question the comment you've made. David Mills. Are you there, David?
Yes, I'm here, James. Go ahead.
Well, you put on the thing, careful, Phil, we've discussed this.
Yeah, with regard to the ammonia, Phil knows what I'm talking about. His quiet little pop at chicken sheds.
I do, David. It wasn't a pop. I mean, and feel free, anyone else, to come in on this. What we know of the science is that ammonia is an issue, and this is one of the sources. It's that I'm trying to be completely sort of.
Yeah, as you know, we have to go through lengthy processes of odor plumes and various things to prove what we're doing is working. And so I just want to keep things in balance a little bit. And we do have 3 months to respond to your consultation, and it is a massive subject that you've opened up here. There's a huge amount of factors that affect it. We could spend days debating this, and we've only got 2 hours. Okay, thank you.
Okay, David. Well, I'm sure you'll send in further comments before the end of the consultation period. Adrian,
Yeah, thanks, James. I mean, I think I'm interested partly in a number of things. One, quite why are we writing this now? Yeah, I can understand what Veronica says, that this is really important, but I mean, isn't the challenge in the delivery of these things? And this prefaces, the ELMS work, which will, be the sort of the main way in which conservation groups can kind of engage with farmers, land managers, and look at the ways in which land is managed for both for kind of productivity purposes, but also for nature. So I'm wondering why now, ahead of ELMS. And the second thing, I suppose, is a sort of a bit of a sinking feeling when I read it, that it feels a bit like the AONB's given up on nature, really, because it's called a nature recovery plan, but in some ways it's a bit of a given up, because it highlights what we call particularly important areas, but isn't the whole of the AONB important? And it sort of looks like we're already starting to sort of suggest in one way that nature is important, but at the same time almost giving up, because we're finding these places for connectivity and recovery, and we've got little lines drawn across maps, but there are gaps in between where it looks like we're just giving up. So there's two things about the what's written, and then the question about the timing, which I'm a bit confused about.
Adrian, thank you. I mean, why ahead of ELM? In order precisely to feed into it, as you'll have read in the paper and in the plan, the Colchester Declaration, the national AONBs, picking up on the Glover report, are trying to give a much higher profile to nature recovery and made a public pledge to produce nature recovery plans. So that's why we're doing it. It's not giving up. It's, as we've said, is precisely to try and give it a higher profile in our work that is absolutely acknowledged nationally that needs to happen. So I'm somewhat baffled by the premise of your question, but I think that's fairly obvious, to be honest, and we really do need to work together to get these things a higher priority. I mean, ELM is going to be a government scheme. It doesn't actually provide much in for conservation groups to work with farmers. It's a government scheme, so there's many. That's going to be one of the delivery mechanisms, but it's only one, and there are a whole variety of other ones that lots of organisations can contribute.
Good. I mean, it'll be just interesting to see, what it contributes down the line. What in terms of the delivery, what will change as a result of this plan? Because plan is all about delivery, so it'll be fascinating to monitor it and see how it goes forward.
Agreed, and we're all in this together, aren't we? So that depends on us all contributing to that delivery.
Okay, Chris, have we answered your question now? No. Helen Dale, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, James.
Yes.
I couldn't make it unmute for a minute, but I have now, I think. So basically, I think, yes, but I suppose I felt there was kind of fantastic content and identification of the kind of complexity and the different range of issues, challenges there. And what I wondered was, perhaps about the kind of delivery kind of issue, is the plan clear enough about who we hope is going to read it and what they're going to do with it? And to what extent is it internal, and we're going to come back to it every 2 or 3 years to see how we're getting on, or to what extent is it more of an ambassadorial, cohering kind of tool to encourage better identification of the AONB and the challenges in it? Perhaps that's asking a bit too much of a first draft of a new kind of format, but I suppose that might help as the as the format evolves and goes forward?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I think it's intended to be a bit of both. I mean, when we say internal, we have to remember what we're talking about. This isn't a plan for the AONB team, and the 9 of us are not going to turn around nature recovery in quarter of the county. Internal among the AONB partnership is all of us and 36 members of the partnership and all the organisations that brings. Obviously, what we do is published publicly, and it is a public document. So what it says in the introduction is that it's aimed at anyone with an interest in nature and nature recovery. We have a really broad range of stakeholders. You know, as we go forward and sort of publicise this through our comms work, we will perhaps, you know, take certain bits of it and put them across in particular ways for particular audiences. But it at this stage, it's got to serve, you know, some broad general purposes for all audiences, really.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Okay, Helen, are you unmuted?
Hopefully I am now. I get my comment was actually going to be remarkably similar to Chris's, really. But I do want to say that I think it's a really good, well pulled together document, well researched, sets out the issues clearly. It was, yeah, just my comment was going to be around who the intended target audience is and how we communicate that, and not to forget that you know, lots of landowners and farmers want to be involved in this recovery. They understand, they get it, and it's just finding those mechanisms. There's a lot going on for farmers and landowners. There's a lot for them, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stuff for them to get their heads around at the moment. So just a huge period of change that maybe, you know, for those that really want to do something, there's still the day-to-day business kind of going on that is going to be pulling them back. So it's how we kind of use this document to try and communicate the opportunities and to get them engaged and excited about how they can help deliver it. Because I think there are lots of people out there that do want to do that. It's just, yeah, and I think congratulations on keeping it to a 35-page document. It's just when we start communicating it more widely, we're going to have to get that down even shorter.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Phil, in your comment, I think we answered all the questions on the chat. On page 20, you talk about adopting a species on the threatened list. How are you going to set about doing that?
This is a tricky one, and was perhaps one of the bits in the Colchester Declaration, the national one, that was kind of the most ambitious, where it talks about action that will enable the removal of species from the threatened list. It is something inherent in the way that the nature of our landscape. We are not an extreme landscape in terms of mountains or coast or whatever. We have quite a lot of species that are found in lots of places. We do have, you know, the marsh flapwort that's found in one of 7 sites in the UK. The things that we could do things about are not necessarily going to change the national picture. So some of this might come about through AONB's kind of choosing to a number of them choosing to take action on some of the same species, and that, you know, collectively having a national impact that we can look at. And I think everyone's still grappling with that. There might be some AONBs that say, well, we can work on this one thing, and what we do in our area will change its threatened status nationally. But I think honestly that's a bit ambitious, and we felt with the kind of adopted species that sort of just focusing on 1 or 2, you know, it sort of narrows the discussion too much. We have put together circulated it before, a sort of page with about 10 species on, things from curlew to oak trees to sphagnum moss to bilberry bumblebee and things like this, you know, which are important species in their own right, but they kind of in their requirements, they demonstrate and illustrate what needs to change in our landscape overall for nature recovery. And we kind of think that holistic sort of thing is actually better, so for our particular circumstance. So that discussion's still ongoing nationally as well as locally is the answer.
Because I was just thinking that it could be a good way of raising the sort of interest amongst the population of the area. I mean, maybe through schools or something, have a competition, or not, you know, to suggest possible species that could be adopted.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that is the purpose. I mean, I suppose the point about the nature recovery plan is that it's casting nature quite broad, that it's not just about individual species. It is about the habitats, it's about ecosystems working, and soil and air and all the water and all those things as well. But the kind of iconic species and even the lesser known, you know, less charismatic species can be really good ways in. But I think they need to be that. They need to be a way in to that bigger discussion rather than just sort of narrowing it down.
Okay. Charles Edwards, I see you've raised a question. Can you unmute and come in?
I think just following up from what both yourself and Phil have just said, is that I understand the general frustration that we in the AONB can't produce a plan that will make everything we want happen. But in a sense, that's our role, is where we can use this plan in terms of wider public education, I think particularly schools. And I think, you know, I can take this back to the members of the organisation I represent on this panel, and other people can take it back. This is actually quite a good logging of the issues and priorities and why this is a problem. And that feeding of the wider public awareness and support for action can only strengthen that the arms of those in ELMS and so on that actually can make a difference in the longer term. So I think we have to be realistic. Many of us would want it to go far further in terms of what we do, but you know, the AONB isn't the main actor in this. What we can do is increase public awareness of the issues, and I think it's an excellent draft for that purpose.
Thank you. I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we've probably exhausted that one for the moment, but it is a very important subject, and as I said before, I do really urge all of you to study it carefully and comment back to Phil with anything you've got, and to spread it as widely as you can amongst all your friends, neighbours and colleagues. So
James, put a question up. I just wanted to say, it's Veronica at the very end. There are lots of very positive things we can get on with straight away. And I think it's very easy with these discussions to focus on the difficulties, and they're real, but there are lots and lots of opportunities, and the mood is right and the need is strong. So I think we could take it from that angle and keep working at the difficulties rather than focus on them to start with and then not get anything done. Okay.
Yep, thank you very much, Veronica. Good. Okay, right. So please feedback, any comments. Moving on to item 4 now, ELMS advocacy and farming in protected landscapes, Phil.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce this one more briefly, and you'll be pleased to hear we won't be doing meditations on the other agenda items. Where the ELM advocacy was a very short notice bit of work that we were asked to do by DEFRA and the National Association just before Christmas, up until the end of March, up until now. And basically it's centered around engaging farmers to sign up to some webinars that were run by the National Association. In the end, that turned out to be one single one that was done last week. We know that online events like this isn't what farmers have really wanted, and we know there wasn't a whole lot new in the announcements in that webinar. And we sort of share those frustrations with how much is coming out from DEFRA, but that's kind of what was possible. we opted to do this work, this advocacy kind of short bit of work in-house with our team. Some AONBs hired in external people. We opted to do it in-house. What that's actually done is helped raise the skills and knowledge of our whole team on this really important topic, and kind of tapped into our the contacts that team members have. So we were able to engage the largest number of bookings onto the webinars from the Shropshire Hills of any of the AONBs and national parks in the country that were all involved in this. So that's really good. There's some feedback awaited. I did ask Kath to speak to prepare to speak a little bit about some of the work she'd done on this. Before I come to Kath, I'll just say about the second part of this, the farming and protected landscapes, where there was a bit of an update at the webinar last week, and it would be useful to hear from anyone who listened into it what they thought. We don't actually really know any more about farming and protected landscapes from that update. The details will be coming soon. We know there's a national framework is going to be set by DEFRA, and then when we're given that, the decisions locally about how it will work will become clear. But things like our budget allocation, the split between these two A and B elements, the profile across the 3 years, eligibility for grants, the duration of grants, the application windows, all of this is the sort of stuff that needs to be set out, and we can't really do that until we know what's set down nationally. So it was supposed to start from the beginning of the new financial year, which is just a couple of days away now, and we have no direct information on the timescale, but clearly it's going to be put back. So that again is a source of some frustration, and that's being fed back to DEFRA by the National Association. But Kath, are you all right to just tell us a little bit about how you've done it? Because as well as getting the bookings, we've had quite a lot of kind of one-to-one conversations on the phone with farmers that I think people have found useful.
Yeah, that's fine, Phil. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so like Phil mentioned, it's been a team effort, but mainly myself and Alison Jones that have been doing the direct contact with the farmers. So Phil asked me just to explain a bit about, what I've been doing and the discussions I've had with the farming community. So it's included the following things. We've been proactively encouraging them to attend the webinars and dealing with incoming inquiries as well. On the promotional side of things, I've had a lot of help from Sarah at the NFU and Helen at CLA. Thanks very much to them. What they did is they sent some information out to all their members, so that was really helpful. And we've been able to link in with the other farming groups that we're working with, like Land Life and Livelihoods, and the Upper Onny Farmers group that I'm working with through the Stepping Stones project, and on the DEFRA testing trials. And obviously we've got the links to the farmers and graziers on the Our Common Cause project as well. And then we've got our own channels of communication through Steph, our promotions officer. So as Phil mentioned, we had the highest, I'm not competitive or anything, but we did have the highest number of people attending out of all the English AONB national parks, so that's great. Really, I've just been explaining what we know. There's not all the detail there that the farmers want at the moment, but we've been explaining, the information that we have got. And I think Helen mentioned before, the farmers are going through a lot of change at the moment. There's lots of information flying around, lots of different people doing different webinars. So it's just trying to help them really to, through this period of change, and give them some clear information about where we are and what's happening, and making sure we're filtering that information through. Also been talking to them about other opportunities at the minute, so this transitional countryside stewardship option, and answering the best questions as best we can, really. Also, it's been an opportunity to link to other relevant officers where needed. I mean, such as Dave Cragg at Natural England. I'm not sure if Dave's on this call today, but you know, I've got strong links with Dave, and we work together well, always have done. And obviously people on our team like Mike and Alison that are doing other work that the farmers might be able to tap into. I'm just thinking about what Veronica said earlier, and I really do agree with you, Veronica. We've got to focus on the things that we can do at the moment, because I think, you know, the environmental land management funding is a few years off yet, but there's a lot of interest now from farmers, so we're trying to sort of maximise on that. Other things that I've been able to link into on that is my work with Andrew Hurl, who I think's on the call today, through our Stepping Stones work and the DEFRA test and trials that we've been doing with farmers in the Upper Onny Valley. We've been developing methodology and testing that around whole farm plans and land management plans, and we've been obviously with an overview of the Stepping Stones project and trying to achieve landscape scale conservation. So we've actually had whole farm plans developed now on 10 holdings, and we're looking at what we can do now to achieve some of the recommendations out of those plans. And just to give you an example, we're talking to a few of the farmers now about possibly tapping into the Severn Trent Boost for Biodiversity funding to do some creation and enhancement of hay meadows on some of these big farms. So that's really positive, but obviously we're looking at that at the moment and trying to help them put an application together. Also linking into other opportunities and projects like the CPRE hedgerow project. Some of the farmers I'm talking to are interested in that, so I've been talking to Rob Rowe and Sarah Jameson about how we can weave them into that. And most of the farmers that I'm talking to about the environmental land management schemes and where we are now, you know, there is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of information, but no real detail or specifics. So it's just really trying to help them as best we can. And we've built up quite a big database through this initial work we've done on ELM. So to me, this is just the start of building relationships and connections and conversations with farmers. Some we've been working with a long time, some we've been working with just more recently, but others are brand new to us and from new areas of the AONB, which is really good. So yeah, I mean, also it'd be interesting to know if any of the partnership members actually attended the webinar recently, and what just briefly what your feedback was on it. I mean, I've had a mixed response from farmers that I've spoken to, because obviously they're all coming into this from, you know, different starting points. But yeah, if anybody who attended it, and have you got any feedback? Because Phil and I are trying to pull together some reporting for the National Association and DEFRA. So any comments you might have on the webinar would be really useful.
Thanks, Gav.
Yeah. I think it's really encouraging that so many Shropshire farmers were involved in this webinar. But I mean, it still worries me that there's an awful lot that weren't, and you know, I don't know how we can get to more of them, but it really would be good. I mean, Carol, how many farmers do you actually sort of represent within the area?
I've got some figures on that. I don't know if Carol's going to answer that, but I've got some information.
But anyway, I'm sure you're working hard, Kath. In fact, I know you are. But you know, it would be really good to, you know, to get even more farmers.
Oh, absolutely. That's what we're always trying to do. I mean, the NFU. I did speak to Sarah about this. She thinks they've probably got about 300 members in the AONB, and Helen, I think Helen said they'd sent the details to just over 3,000 members across the region, so that's a wider area, and 132 to members in and around the AONB. So I think you know, you're right, we have got to sort of reach out, and I think as we get more information, perhaps one of the things we should be doing is taking like a roadshow out, or target different areas of the AONB, you know, find out what groups are there, what farmer groups, and try and work together and do some more localized you know, talks, evenings, etc. That's when it tends to work, when you get into a local area and move around the AONB.
We've discovered from the June agricultural census that's been cut to national landscape boundaries now, that there are 917 registered farm holdings in the AONB at the last census. So that's a figure that we haven't had before. So that's useful to know. And one thing we really are in discussion with DEFRA about is the contact details, because we don't have that contact list. You know, we need to engage sort of more broadly, and there's a simple sort of, you know, data sharing issue about the contact details. I should also point out that in relation to you know, Adrian's comments earlier about why we're doing a nature recovery plan, we're on the brink of one of the biggest, you know, grants to landowners sort of programs that we've ever had with farming in protected landscapes, and we very deliberately pushed the nature recovery plan on in order to have something that will help guide the farming in protected landscapes program.
Okay, thank you very much, Kath, on that one. I noticed, Nicola, you've raised a question: is there one web page for all the grants and funding schemes? It would be one hell of a big web page, I think, and quite complicated. To make it simple would be very difficult, because, you know, different schemes are available for different types of farmers and in different areas, etc. But I don't know whether you've got any view on that, Phil.
I think it's something we probably should do for the AONB. When people talk about kind of one thing, the boundaries that you put around it in terms of topic and in terms of geography are always the issue, and how far you go. It is something we want to kind of improve on our own web pages, and as you know, with farming in protected landscapes, it gives farmers and landowners a much stronger reason to interact with us and likelihood of coming to our website. So putting something up like that, I think, has potential to be useful. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Okay, I'd like to move on now to item 5, South Shropshire Climate Action Land and Biodiversity Group Plan. And we've got Nick Reed representing the South Shropshire Climate Action Group here today. So who's going to lead on it? Are you going to, Phil?
Well, I'll just say very quickly, I mean, this item sort of brings together some of the other things we've been talking about nature recovery, about climate change on the agenda later on, and about the farming side. So I've been working, you know, with Nick and the small group and a larger group on this for some weeks, and thank you very much, Nick, for coming along, and I'll happily pass to you to talk about it.
Thank you. Well, it's nice to be back. I sat on this group for about a decade, but well over a decade ago. So it's good to see some of you again anyway. Can I just give this a context, because I think it does address some of the questions that people have already raised in the previous debate. This came out of a conference that took place in September, organised by the South Shropshire Climate Action Partnership. And the idea was to try and do something for South Shropshire, which basically means the Ludlow constituency, but we're not a political group. Try and do something to address both the climate and ecological debate that you're all involved with. And at the end of the conference, it was resolved to set up a number of working parties, and the land use and biodiversity group had by far the largest attendance of people who wanted to join. We had over 40 people, the average was about 6. And what was really interesting was the mix of people, because although there were working farmers, Phil was part of it and so on, we've had retired civil servants and people who have a knowledge of land use. The vast majority were members of the public who were simply interested in the role that land use could play. So when Carol talks about, you know, her neighbours' views on hedgerow management, we see this as part of the transmission of raising public awareness. And Charles also raised the idea about, you know, how do we increase public awareness? There is a constituency of people out there that are interested, and it's how we can raise these issues with them in a user-friendly way. So the idea was to produce a sort of overarching plan. It is no coincidence that it fits in with many of the things that you're saying, because as I say, Phil was very much a part of the drafting group. And I just want to talk about the way we approached it. So the actual report, which I don't think many of you have seen, and what you have got won't be what it looks like in its final version, but We are looking at land use, climate change and biodiversity through the lens of South Shropshire. So our starting point is to try and articulate what is already happening in South Shropshire and what has shaped the landscape within this locality. Now, the AONB is an important part of that, but you may not thank me for saying this. You know, in a way, the AONB has been the recipient of a significant amount of advisory efforts of the ESA schemes of countryside stewardship, which perhaps the rest of South Shropshire has not. So part of this is also a levelling up process, and how do we bring the rest of the land use community up to your levels? And that's not to say there isn't room for improvement all over. So we're starting by describing the patch in a number of terms and trying to make that explicable. We're writing, of course, ultimately for a land use and policy audience, but we're also writing for the general public. So, and it's been interesting that people who have seen a draft said they didn't know, for example, about SSSIs or SACs or the plethora of land management titles, the moorland line, less favoured areas and so on. So just explaining that to people and some of the measures that land managers have to operate under has proven to be quite useful. We've also tried to gauge the appetite for local change, and Helen mentioned that farmers locally are willing to do some of this, and there's also some survey data out there that shows that farmers definitely want to play a role in this. So it's how we give momentum to that. And the other thing we did under this section was just to gather evidence of what was already happening. So this is Veronica's point. You know, there's an enormous amount already happening in South Shropshire. It's a question about how coordinated it is and how we can give momentum to that. But again, this is part of a drive to do that. The second bit of the report then was to look at some of the policy drivers for change, which you've talked about already this morning, particularly ELMS, nature recovery networks, but also the debate about public goods and natural capital. And again, just trying to make that explicable to people who aren't already in that loop. So part of the awareness raising. But again, also looking through the lens of South Shropshire. How is it likely to apply here, and what should we be arguing for? And including within that, there is a debate about how we might beef up both hedgerow protection, but also the skills required for good hedgerow management and how we support that. And a golden thread throughout all of this is the economic viability of the farming community, because without that we're stuffed anyway. So there's a recognition in all of this that this is not just aspirational, it has to be founded in economic viability. And then the next section is where we look at practical measures. David made the point that this is a massive topic, and it's absolutely true, and we're not writing an academic treatise. It's also quite a contested topic. If you look at the debate about, you know, carbon sequestration inland, the science is not exact, and sometimes it's quite widely contested and quite diverse. So the view that we have taken is not to represent any sort of blueprint, but to give a sense of direction and to try and highlight the efficacy of that sense of direction by using a system of traffic lights. Colleagues who have been writing, you know, the chapter on thermal efficiency of buildings are able to measure with great precision what will happen if you retrofit a house. That isn't true with biological systems, so we're not suggesting it is, but we're proposing a particular route. And when you weigh those things together, what's already happening, what's needed locally, we are recommending, I suppose, an agroecological approach. That's not to denigrate the idea of BECCS and some of the things that the Carbon Climate Committee have come up with, but it's taking the view, is that really going to happen in South Shropshire? And is that what makes people tick locally, as well as the implications for landscape? And you are, of course, an area of outstanding natural beauty. So you don't want to lose all of those things when you're looking at tackling climate change and biodiversity in the future. We've also looked quite a lot at the debates that are taking place, the Lawton principles, nature recovery networks, and we are very much making the point that many of you have made this morning, that even if you have areas of high biodiversity, the connections between them are crucially important. And our view is it's not just about corridors, it's actually about how you produce food economically in ways that also benefit wildlife, hence the agroecological approach. So we're trying to move away from a silo mentality into a much more integrated approach. Nature recovery networks are part of that, but if anything, it's even wider than nature recovery networks because it's looking at farming systems as a whole. And we give some examples within that of what we're actually talking about so that people can understand where we're coming from. And the final section of this is then to try and make the link with the consumer, and in particular with the future implications of diet and food choice. So there is also a part of this on food and food waste and where that fits in with community action. The final report itself, as I say, we're just writing the land use and biodiversity chapter. It will be part of a much bigger approach, and part of that will also be a connection about community engagement. So it is part of how we raise the profile of land use needs with a much wider community that is also interested in this debate. What Phil's produced for you is a summary of the sort of key points that we come up with, but I mean, the thing at the moment is 43 pages long. It's far too long, but the final thing will also include infographics and photographs, and it will be much more sexy than just the written text. But the key points are where we're heading for. As I say, it's the idea is to launch a debate. It isn't to be prescriptive. It's a sense of momentum, giving momentum to things that are already happening, a sense of direction and not a blueprint. We do not expect everyone to agree with everything that we've written, but we hope that we've written it in such a way that it will engage in debate and will lead to, again, giving momentum to what you're talking about and adding to future land use changes. Because Veronica is quite right, there are so many plans out there, but we've got to get things going on the ground or give momentum to what's already happening and make it work better. Enough of the spiel from me. I'm happy to field any questions or just take comments. I think it will be launched publicly on May the 22nd on a Zoom conference, and pretty soon after that the hope is to have a debate with the MP who, as you all know, is chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, and see whether some of the policy recommendations that are in that can also be fed through to government.
Okay, thank you very much. Can anyone who wants to ask a question say so in the chat, please? I have to say, Nick, one of the comments that Phil put in his paper, ensure that farmers are rewarded for the quality of the food they produce. I would love to know how we're going to do that locally, but we could debate that forever, I suspect.
We can, but it's still important to keep saying it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there's nothing new. I get, well, there's a lot that isn't new in all of this, but it's important to keep saying it. And I think what is new, perhaps, is the appetite within a local audience to try and consider some of these things. Yeah, and that's because of the the climate change and biodiversity that is obviously hitting the headlines. It is raising the profile, and it gives an opportunity to inject some of this into the local community. Yeah.
Adrian, you want to see a draft? Presumably we can circulate that, can we, Nick?
Yes, you can. Phil has got copies. As I say, the final thing will not look anything like this. And there will be one or two minor changes, editorial things that are coming back, but essentially the text is going to be what we're arguing for.
Okay.
Neil's asked about diet change. We're not recommending diet changes. What we're trying to do is to assess how the debates that are going on about diet might impact. So the Eat Lancet Commission and a load of work that's been done on the link between food production and carbon. We're not advocating, for example, that everyone should go vegan and so on, but we're probably saying if there was a reduction in ruminant animals, what does that mean locally? And when people are considering their own diets, and there's increasing evidence that people are, do they consider local produce as part of that? The other great driver, which is sort of ancillary to all of this, is where health comes into it. And health, of course, has got money attached. So the link between health providers and diet is quite important. And some of the resources for future land management might actually come from those sources rather than just through DEFRA and public goods seen in other ways. So we felt it was important to include part of that debate within the whole report.
Okay.
Yes, David, it's written on all of our hearts that without an economically viable agriculture, all of this is a waste of time. But it is a debate about how we get economic viability and biodiversity writ together as opposed to seeing them as separate things. And I mean, in academic circles, there's a debate about land sharing or land sparing, and we're basically fudging that and saying, yes, we have areas of high biodiversity, but unless farming itself is nature friendly as well, then we're on to a lost cause with climate change anyway. So how do we make farming nature friendly? And of course, there are local examples where that's already happened. So it's not a blank sheet of paper, but it's how do we give momentum to that?
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think if there aren't any more questions, we'll move on to item 6, Phil, the National Association's collaboration group.
Okay, thanks, James. So yeah, this is a relatively new thing. The National Association put obviously quite a high priority on collaboration and done various things in the past. This was actually a new idea to get a fairly small number of people from a few AONB teams together with some people from outside of the AONB network entirely to sort of share ideas on particular things. So the group initially recruited literally put out sort of adverts externally for volunteers from outside the network to get involved, and from within the network people applied. Things changed quite quickly early on. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 people from external who'd got involved had to drop out for their own reasons, and I think 1 of the internal people did as well. So I was asked to join the group, which by that point had decided to focus on climate change, and this group has been meeting weekly and online, and it prepared a session for the lead officers meeting. This is an annual get together of lead officers that's normally in Birmingham in person, and for the first time this year was online. And it was really useful to focus that meeting on on climate change and get people's thoughts on it. So I've put some of the slides that were used in that meeting in the papers. You'll see the page 18, 19, the sort of table format where we're kind of scoping the climate change topic and looking at how it impacts on various different bits of the AONB remit, obviously land, in relation to habitats, in relation to farming, and the sort of impacts of climate change is one part on that first part of the table. On the second part, there's much broader things around people and their behaviour, consumption, tourism, transport, renewable energy, and so on, and obviously buildings and the links to planning. So quite a few different ways. And like most things, the sort of influence of AONB partnerships is kind of relatively small, but actually it's important to see that we can do stuff related to climate change kind of across the whole remit rather than in particular areas. So I wanted to kind of draw your attention to the slide on page 21, what teams are currently doing. This was actually stuff that was captured from lead officers during the meeting, and it shows the range of stuff as people are doing, and we did a few polls on how many areas have got local climate partnerships, like the one that I've been working on with Nick and others, the South Shropshire one, and obviously the SCAP county level one that we had Mark Fermor along from at the last meeting. And I think about 2/3 of AONB areas have got those partnerships operating, and about half of the people were kind of actively involved with them from AONB teams. So that's kind of interesting to know. The national parks are doing quite a bit of work, and there's a slide on that. We decided not to sort of feed the lead officers immediately what the national parks are doing and just sort of generate our own ideas first. Obviously the park authorities, our planning authorities, they have kind of stronger powers. It says using our planning powers. You know, they have a much greater role in that area. And then the last of those slides is trying to sort of pick out some of the ways ahead. We're looking through this collaboration group to get more people from AONB teams, not just lead officers, anyone from AONB teams involved in this sort of collaborative work on climate change, and sort of focusing on subtopics really, so possibly on land, on planning, on tourism, transport, that kind of thing. And work out what we can do. We're actually looking at there's some very good material available on carbon literacy. There's some programs specifically for local authorities, which is one aspect. People did feel we kind of they needed sort of more knowledge upskilling and sharing of that information. So yeah, I hope that's useful to know about, and a sort of background to the work that we're doing. Very happy to have any comments or try and answer any questions.
If you could put on chat if you want to say anything.
Shall I answer?
Yeah.
Alison's question there. What's meant by a climate change planning objection? This was a really interesting one. Actually, came from one of the AONBs in the southeast, which is actually to sort of take a suggestion of could we take an objection to a planning application for a specific development, kind of really focused on the grounds that it was it would be harmful in terms of climate change, in terms of carbon emissions. Whether or not there's a direct impact on the AONB, acknowledging that climate change actually is kind of the biggest long-term threat to our landscape and everything we value about the AONB, and simply can we object to things that are bad for carbon emissions and climate change more generally, for that reason.
Okay, I think we'll move on if there are no more questions to collaboration for visitor management. I think you're going to lead on this, aren't you, Nigel?
Thanks, James. Yeah, Phil asked me to say a few words about what we've been up to. Good morning, everybody. You'll be aware from previous discussions with this group, and obviously from the paper that Phil circulated, that we've been working closely with the National Trust and Town Council and Shropshire Council in Church Stretton to try and resolve and improve the situation with visitor pressure as a result of the release from lockdown. Last year, many places, including Cardingmill Valley, reached national headlines. But there's a lot more to that whole story than meets the eye, and it's a complicated one, as I'm sure you all appreciate. I wanted to share with you, though, before I go in, just talk about the details sent around. We are now in direct contact with the people who are working on the ground in Cardingmill Valley, and I hope to grow a network which is called Ground Control, where we're sharing information amongst all of the people working out on the ground in car parks and countryside places where we can get people. I'll read you Tom's literally just pinged this to me whilst we've been talking over the last piece. This is Tom Langrick. I have a new number. Yesterday was a great day. We had a good atmosphere in the valley. Lots of member supporters and many newcomers, as well as some who have been before. I was in my element on the welcome entrance, and my team member Sam handled his baptism of fire with confidence beyond his years. We have exciting times ahead, and we are set up to manage what comes our way. Some people so happy to come out and be in the valley was a joy that we can all feed off. I know I've gone off topic here, but hey, it's all good. I asked a simple question about how was it yesterday, and that's what I got back, that kind of level of enthusiasm, the people working on the ground, meeting and greeting people. And we need to focus on the fact that the meeting and greeting is vitally important. That this is actually about making sure people have as a good time as possible, but in a way that doesn't damage the landscape that we're all here to conserve and enhance. So we have a 6-point plan that we've started talking about with the really key partners. Phil engaged them in a meeting earlier on in March. We had a really good attendance, and we talked about these issues based around this 6-point plan. And most importantly, the first thing is that the public need information. We did a visitor survey last year that showed that that many of our visitors, as we already know, are repeat visitors, and so they don't feel that they need too much information, but the ones that do need information do need it to be correct. And there are many new people coming to our area and to other areas, so we need to work and make sure that what we're putting out to people is the best that we can, so we're working on that. We need to encourage people to find new places that are as robust. We need to not just disperse people though geographically, we need to disperse them temporarily. They need to come at different times of the day, not all hit us in the peak. They need to come at different times of the year, and as well as we need to promote places that are possibly less well known but can equally or would even be welcoming of more visitors. We do need to encourage responsible behaviour. Last year they had a no-nonsense policy when it came to barbecues. They just walked straight up to anybody barbecuing on the Longmynd and sprayed water all over the barbecue immediately without even a good morning or a good afternoon because of the risk. I was talking to Pete Carty. He told me that a tender has to be on site for a week after there's been a barbecue fire because of the problem with peat and the fire re-emerging from beneath the ground. And so the incredible resources that have to go into to manage the fire problem. As one example, I myself spent time collecting litter last year and filled several bags just after a couple of days, and there were photographs across our social media about litter that needs to be. We need to encourage people to take their litter home with them and clear up after their dogs, etc. Not park in gateways and all the rest of that messaging. The new countryside code is about to be launched. It's been delayed, unfortunately. It would have been really good to have it this week, but there has been a delay on that. But that is something we'll be strongly encouraging, and also we'll be coordinating over the message. And the messages at the moment are very much about having a plan B. That if you want to go somewhere and you realise that place is Phil, sorry, could you just go back to that last slide, because I'll just tick my way through it quickly. They need to have a plan B. They need to think about where else they can go, which is a requirement of sort of planning your day ahead that possibly people are unused to. So there is a bit of behaviour change required there. Obviously, we need to support the local community as far as possible, because they do have an impact. Visitors do have an impact on that community. But it's about also promoting businesses and as well as supporting farmers and people impacted by visitor pressure. So we're working locally to help with that, and feeding into longer term plans for visitor infrastructure. So we're talking about what else we can do to be more prepared for these problems into the future. But also, and let's not forget that we need to monitor what the pressure is even without COVID. In my opinion, we've got some areas that are getting worn out. They're getting loved to death, and we need to start working on that. And I think that's all part of the nature recovery message that we discussed earlier. Thanks, Phil. If we could have the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So working in partnership with groups of people, this is what we've done so far. Working with the National Trust and the residents and getting real on-the-ground experience in Church Stretton. We conducted a visitor survey last year, and that's informing our approaches and our approach for this year, especially with respect to communications and media, and helping us to understand visitor behaviour So we've set the shuttle bus up to run this year. It's a drop in the ocean with a number of visitors, but it's an important flagship for our sustainable views on sustainable tourism. We're working hard this year, as we always do, but to try and fit it into the existing bus and train services so that people can travel to the hills on public transport, get off what they travel on and get onto our bus, and they don't have to wait around too much. So we're making connections. We are running a slightly adapted service this year that will go and terminate at Stuyvesant Inn, basically turning around there and then coming back and going and rejoining the old route at Rattling Hope. The reason for this is we want to try and get more people onto the bus, and there's the older part of the route that used to go from Minsterley and Ponsbury, etc., wasn't carrying that many customers. Improving our information. One of the things we've noticed is the sort of lack of concern for the Google listing, or just not really recognising this is a thing. If you've just put into, or if you're doing a search because you want somebody's postcode, then, or a place's postcode, then you get this information popping up, and that might be the only thing that you read, you see. And so that information needs to be correct. So it already shows you things like peak visiting hours, and you know, and we want to draw people's attention to that, but we also want to own that information. The default setting for Google is Wikipedia. So, but we can ask Google to change it, and we can put our own information there. So we should be doing that, as well as making sure that the information on our own websites, etc., is up to date. We're running a pilot scheme for Park Shropshire Hills. We're all using the same hashtag through social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're involving local radio in following that stream as well. And this is where the people on the ground, coordinated by a single ground coordinator, will be posting information directly to the public on social media. The idea is if people are travelling, then some of the people in the car will be scrolling through social media, and we're going to try and encourage them to follow this hashtag to get up-to-date information about the places they're visiting. It's a new scheme. It's taking a little while to take off. There are some flaws that we're trying to iron out, but we'll be going live with it this weekend for the bank holiday weekend. And as I said, I mentioned at the start, we are recruiting more and more people to be part of this ground control, ground coordinator network, to feed information to those coordinators, so we can make sure that the information we're posting is accurate, it's up to date. It's not just passing the problem on somewhere else where they've already got a problem. It's a shared awareness of where the problem is. It's very, very easy to just focus on one place, because that's the place you are. And this gives us an opportunity to see a much bigger picture in a way that we've not been able to do before. So all in all, lots of good stuff happening, and I'm very happy to answer any questions anybody has.
If people could put any questions on chat, that would be good. Claire Featherstone, are you there still? Because I'm just wondering, what plans have the council got to sort of distribute the new countryside code amongst rural communities, or is there any plan?
I can answer some of that, James, if Claire's not there. Okay. Steph is working closely with the countryside team at Outdoor Partnerships, as well as the National Association, to distribute the information as widely as possible. I don't know myself whether or not that also means in paper form, but I think an awful lot of it will be through virtual means and using the most direct methods.
But I mean, are we going to make sure that sort of car parks and places like that, there are laminated copies of the countryside code?
I don't know that detail.
No, that sort of thing needs to happen. I guess it is Shropshire Council that should be doing that rather than us. Okay. If we can move on, I'm just wondering, Phil, whether we should move to the partner activity now because Sue Lee's got a presentation, hasn't she? And then because we're sort of running out of time slightly.
Sue, I think, is not in the meeting. I've had an email from Tim saying she's struggling. I have got some pictures from her which I can show, and I've got a few to show in support of the work programme update very quickly.
Okay, let's do that. Then we'll come back to the team programme.
Okay. Right. Okay. I had the work programme ones first. Is that
sorry?
Is that all right? Can we stick to that?
Okay,
order?
do that.
Yeah.
But let's make sure we have time before 11:30 to discover what Sue was wanting to say.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I mean, obviously, in the team work programme, there's lots of stuff there. It's a big update on most of the financial year. If there's anything that people want to ask about or either within the meeting or outside the meeting, then do. I wanted to just show a few pictures of the scheme down at Broadwood Meadow, where the River Clun leaves Shropshire into Herefordshire, where Alison Jones has worked really hard over a couple of years to get this scheme with pipes under the highway as here. And what this has done is a couple of snippets from some recent drone footage that shows this fantastic wetland. Unfortunately, it's a little bit cropped, so the road is sort of at the top of the picture here, and the river comes round to the left, and this whole area drains into the bottom. We've got another view of it here. So this is the river on the right, and this sort of shallow swale kind of turns into a quite a nice wetland and ditch there, which is, so that's been a really good project. And the other one that Mike in particular has been working with up at Brook Vessons with a landowner there about sort of renaturalising some of the sort of very top of the catchment and some small ditches. This is kind of right on the boundary between Shropshire Wildlife Trust's Brook Vessons Reserve and this landowner's land. So this is one of these leaky dams in a drainage ditch to obviously very deliberately sort of hold water back, and the idea is to spill the water. As you can see here, this is the ditch with this one's got the sort of earth plug protected by sort of Hessian matting, and the small bund's been broken there, and this is exactly what we're sort of hoping for, to get this kind of water flowing across the surface and seeping through rather than draining off sort of more rapidly in the ditch. So that's gone well, and there's quite a few of the land drains under the drains underneath have been fractured in order to sort of bring more water to the surface. To restore the wetland there, and then there's a couple of ponds and scrapes as well. So those were the pictures I wanted to show on the work programme. I wanted also very quickly to flag up a couple of things about project development. There's stuff in there, obviously, with the nature recovery plan out. The sort of nature recovery is going to be a focus for our project development. We've got some work on peatlands that we're looking at. We did put into the Green Recovery Challenge Fund and weren't successful for that. They've actually changed that now, and peatland stuff is not eligible for that because government have opened or will be opening shortly a new peat capital grant scheme. So we're developing our project on shallow peatlands for that. We've had lots of useful contact across different departments of both the local authorities, which is good. I also wanted to flag up with the partnership membership. We do the membership review for this group, the partnership, every 2 years, and so the individual seats and the parish and town council seats get re-advertised and reappointed every 2 years, and we do a review on the organisations if any haven't been attending or want to drop out and any new ones want to come in. So that process will go on this summer, just to warn you about that, and to remind everyone that we've said this before, there is still a vacant place on the AONB Trust, the Shropshire Hills AONB Trust, our local small charity. It appoints 3 trustees from the partnership members, and George Chancellor and Veronica are the 2 at the moment. There is 1 vacant one on that, if anybody was interested in doing that. So they were the things I wanted to flag on the work programme.
Okay. Has anyone got any questions? I must say, there's an amazing range of subjects that have been covered at the moment by the team. I think, it's probably more than we've ever seen, really. So,
well, as I say, it's more or less the full year update there. So there is quite a lot in there. That's right. But thank you.
But please, anyone, if they want to understand more about what's going on, I suggest you contact Phil or the member of the team. In the meantime, Phil, let's move on to the Sue Lee.
Yeah, and I will call out for Sue at this point just to see if she is there, whether she can unmute. But I don't think she is. But I've had a few pictures through, and I have to say I've known Sue for a long time in the District Bridleways Association, and looking through there's a range of practical work they've been doing, which I didn't know was happening, which is fantastic to see. I suppose in a little bit like, as I understand it, a little bit like the way the parish paths groups work in very local areas, working with the council rights of way team for sort of practical support and materials and tools and so on. This Bridleways group works obviously specifically on bridleways and I guess possibly byways as well, but routes for horse riders sort of over a much bigger area than one parish or a few parishes. So I'll just flick through some of these pictures where they've done some of this work. Just the signage, and
I recognise that.
Gates and clearance. Do you? Yeah, I recognised some of the places and not others.
In between me and James, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Obviously out in all weathers, this looks fairly good. Sorry, these are screen grabs from a little video on Facebook, so that's why. As I said, this is one of the council rights of way team who are obviously providing support again. All weathers, and as you all know how these routes and paths can get seriously overgrown and cutting back. Yeah, won't get a horse through that. Let's see in the middle. Again, gates. New bridle gate with the special handle latches that you can operate from mounted on horseback. So there we go. It was just a quick flavour, and sorry, I'm not a good substitute for Sue to actually explain it, but thank you to her for putting that forward.
Okay, thanks very much. Cool. Right, has anyone got any other thing they want to talk about or mention? No? Okay, well, we can draw the meeting to a close. We've skipped through that last one quite quickly. Good. The next meeting is on Tuesday, the 14th of July at 9:30. Hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed, we can be face to face. Presumably, Phil, you will.
It's possible, yeah. We'll just have to keep an eye on the rules as they change. We haven't made any plans as yet for a sort of summer tour. Obviously, depending on how things change, there might be more possibility to actually do something outdoors than a kind of indoor sit-down meetings. We have had a sort of suggestion that we could do kind of smaller site visit meetings, that we throw out a kind of suggestion to meet at a particular place and look at a particular topic and kind of not expect everyone to come, and maybe have have a smaller number of people. So that's a possibility. We'll keep looking at these things as they come up. But I mean, I thank you to everyone for sticking with the online format. It is quite hard work, and I think we're all agreed that being back together will be good when we can do it.
Phil, it's Bill Klemperer here from Historic England.
Yes.
Sorry, James, I should have perhaps come in very briefly when you asked for any further partner updates. I was just going to say a couple of things very quickly for Historic England. Sorry, Phil, to cut in there.
Carry on.
It was just really obviously Historic England, our work. I mean, normally we have to have quite a lot of work in the AONB because of the numbers of scheduled monuments and designated historic environment assets. But of course, over the last year or more, obviously that's been very, very limited, like everybody's work in the AONB. And we're in what we call the SHINE window, the Select Heritage Inventory for Natural England, where we get consulted on applications for land management, and we're concentrating, again, as we normally do, on responding to all of those in terms of scheduled monuments and their condition. So we concentrate particularly on those scheduled monuments, ancient monuments that are at high risk or vulnerable or in deteriorating condition. So we can take the opportunity to really work with landowners and let them know what good management is for ancient monuments. And it's also a chance to check on their condition and generally update our record. So that's an important area of work, and in the AONB, because there's a lot of scheduled monuments, particularly field archaeology earthwork monuments. Just so you know, that there's quite an exciting project at Stokesay Castle at the moment. I expect some of you know that they're using it for actually a set for a feature film called Catherine Come Birdie. So it's been slightly traumatic for me and Alison having to sort out all it's quite different to our normal sort of work, where somebody might want to put a new water supply in there. What they do is incredible when they bring that sort of resource. But that's all very exciting, and of course will lead to lots of publicity for the area and perhaps more visitors. So that's all happening quite soon. Alison's has been doing before the lockdown some great work with the National Trust on the Long Mynd, looking at their scheduled monuments and how to raise awareness and work with them, and the National Trust volunteers. And Alison MacDonald, my colleague, will be picking that up when we're allowed to travel more freely. And just finally on Offa's Dyke, we did do a conservation management plan with CADU and other partners a couple of years ago, and we're hoping that we'll be able to take that forward. We have got some significant funding in principle agreed finally from Historic England, and also with CADU and others partners, including the Offa's Dyke Association. So more news on that hopefully for this group in the not too distant future, which we hope will be quite exciting. And what we can say now is that we have commissioned with CADU some LiDAR, this very close contour laser survey, at a resolution hitherto which hasn't been possible for the whole of Offa's Dyke, and indeed, and that'll be all the way through the AONB as well, of course, where it goes through South Shropshire. So some exciting developments there, but of course our work has been limited by the difficulties with COVID. Sorry to come in rather late there, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I would encourage anyone who's a member of the partnership to talk about what their group is doing at future meetings. And if you would like to talk, please mention it to Phil so we can put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. If there's no more comments, then I'll close the meeting and wish you all a very happy day in the nice sunshine. Okay,
James.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Great.